Welcome back to the BoshNRoll channel. Today I'm doing my tournament report of last weekend's regional championship in Milwaukee, a tournament where I finished 25th out of almost 1,200 players, and the top 32 make it to the Pro Tour. We are so back. This is the deck I played. It's the Simic Cub, or Simic Ouroboroid, Simic Rhythm. It has many names, but it's basically Legacy Natural Order Elves, which is a deck I have a lot of reps with and makes sense to my brain. I didn't start with this deck though. Here's the final standings of the event, and you'll notice 2 copies of Is It Spelementals in the top 8. This is the deck I started with. This deck is basically tailor-made at the last Pro Tour to defeat the Cub decks. Sunderflock is a nightmare. There's a bunch of Pyroclasms in the sideboard, excellent removal, 1-mana removal in the main deck, Spell Snares, and Burst Lightnings. Nightmare fuel. And I started with this deck in my testing. I had about 4 weeks to figure out Standard, and this is coming from nothing. You all watch my YouTube videos. You see me releasing Legacy and Pre-Modern and Vintage every day of the week. That's my magic time. Standard, I was coming from the last big Standard event I played. VV was legal, so it's been multiple set releases and a big ban update since I've played this format. But I try to follow the data when I'm getting into something that's not really my area, when I need to figure something out. And this Is It Spelementals deck, I think it had like a 70+% win rate at the Pro Tour. The team that made it was boasting about, I think almost everybody day two'd, and then almost everybody who day two'd requalified. It was a dominating constructed performance for a deck that really crushed the metagame, and that's what I want. So I started here, and I realized I was not winning basically at all, despite having a lot of fun. Opt, sleight of hand, low to the ground stuff. This is exactly my type of vibe. But the Spelementals deck, it turns out, is weak against Is It Lessons, and kind of hit or miss versus the green landfall deck, which was not a big player at the Pro Tour, but quickly emerged online as something people were excited about after the Pro Tour. And you'll notice in this top 8, Is It Lessons, and mono green landfall, all present. All the decks we're talking about here. And when I moved off of the Spelementals deck because I realized the metagame didn't look good for it, I tried the Landfall deck and I was like, wow, this deck looks really sweet. Kind of still under the radar a little bit. But then, like 4 days before I was leaving for Milwaukee, the Arena Championship metagame was announced, which was a big Standard event, and Mono Green Landfall was the #1 most registered deck for that tournament. And I realized this was not going to be a secret, even if I thought it was good. And then we had the metagame conversation of if Simic Rhythm, Simic Cub is level 0, because everybody understands that this deck is fundamentally busted. And then Is It Spelementals is level 2 because it's good against Cub. And then Landfall is level 3 because it's good against Spelementals. Then maybe it's time to go back to 0 and learn the Simic Cub deck, because this deck obliterates Landfall. Like, hilariously, there is very little green Landfall can do, because the Simic Rhythm deck is just so fast, and Landfall is a few turns slower on its combos, doesn't have any type of interaction in the main deck. It's just a race, and it's a race they are not favored in. And that's where I ended up on Simic Rhythm at the end of this whole cycle, where I had wasted about 3.5 of my 4 weeks to prepare for this tournament. 2 weeks on Elementals, a week and a half on green Landfall, and then found Cub right at the very end. But this is what I ended up registering. I called this Legacy Natural Order Elves, which is something that I didn't really understand at first. I thought this was more like Maverick, I guess, than Elves. I didn't realize, and this is me showing my ass here, that I really don't know what's going on in Standard, despite this BoshNRoll Cub deck being a player at the last Pro Tour, though it didn't do well. But also, I believe it existed the Pro Tour before that. Certainly the Regional Championship Portland before this Pro Tour. This deck is just fully out there and everyone knows it's broken, even me who doesn't play Standard. But I didn't really know why it was broken. I thought we had these mana dorks, and then Cub advances the mana dorks, got a little bit of a toolbox going on with Nature's Rhythm and Formidable Speaker, and eventually somewhere down the road, you can get your Craterhoof Behemoth and win. Like, I thought this was more of like a mid-range toolbox Ouroboroid deck. I thought Ouroboroid was plan A, and then Hoof was just something that happened sometimes. But I had a conversation with Mason B, who got second place at the regional championship in Portland with the Simic Cubs deck. And he basically showed me something, and notice this timestamp. This is February 19th at 12:58 p.m. I left for this tournament on February 20th at like 10 a.m. from my house. So this is less than 12 hours before I'm getting on a plane for this tournament. And Mason, just this quick little conversation, he showed me some of the sample hands and how to read them. And I understood that this 7-card hand wins the game on turn 3, and you don't even need to draw another card. And I realized that I was not thinking about this correctly. I was not thinking about getting the second and third Badger Mole Cub. I was thinking, once I have a Cub, then I can get more mana and I can get into my mid-range stuff and the Craterhoof will show up eventually. But no, just this hand right here is a turn 3 Craterhoof Behemoth with no additional help. And just being shown these two sequences from Mason, and then I goldfished the deck a few times and I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I have been missing the whole point here. This deck is actually broken. And then I had a follow-up question like an hour later of, how aggressively do you mulligan? Are we fine going to 5? Because you know me, Island Ponder Keep. I just want to keep 7 most of the time. I was keeping hands that are like 2 lands, a Cub, a Rhythm, without a Dork. I wasn't really pushing for the nuts at all in my 10 or 15 games that I had played online with this deck. I was just trying to figure it out on my own at first. And he reminded me, deck has 4 Riddlers, you're fine going to 5, and you don't really need Cub. Getting the extra mana from Dorks is more important at first, and you'll figure out the rest later. And armed with that information, I sat in my basement watching YouTube videos while goldfishing the paper copy of the deck over and over again. And I also purchased this standard Simic Cub guide from creator Toothy, who is an arena grinder. This is not a person I was familiar with before. I basically just Googled standard Simic Cub guide and found this Metafy, and Toothy had finished a season ranked 1 in Constructed, which is really hard to do. You got to play a lot and win a lot for that to be true. So I trusted the validity and had this big guide that was able to help inform some of the matchups. And we could see, even though this was written January 19th, Toothy has kept it updated on January 14th and January 19th, or February 14th and February 19th, which conveniently, if you remember these timestamps, is exactly the day I'm trying to figure out how to play Cub. So I had the Toothy guide, some quick guidance from Mason, and goldfishing in my basement were my reps before the tournament with this. The BoshNRoll channel is brought to you by Tales of Adventure. TOAMagic.com has almost 100,000 unique cards in stock. They offer free track shipping on every order, plus next day or 2-day options when you have an event coming up fast. They offer on-site pickup at major Magic events throughout the US, so you're never scrambling before your tournament. Stop by their booth to buy, sell, or trade at upcoming regional championships, Magic Con, Spotlight Series, and more. I love their selection of individually scanned high-end cards that show you exactly what you're buying. And the best part is saving 5% on every order with promo code BOSH. From Ancestral Recall to Zombie Master, get what you need quickly and in one place at TOAMagic.com. Eternal lives here. The list itself, I'm not going to go into too many details because Toothy did all the work, not me. I straight up copied the list. But 2 main deck Oko was something that, if you'll notice, Mason was doing on January 24th to get to the finals of the last SCG Con, the last regional championship. But that seemed to have fallen out of favor, but Toothy pulled it back to it. It wasn't in either of the first 2 lists. It wasn't in the 119 or the 214, but it was in the 219 one. And I really like this. Oko does some important things where it's basically just really good against every non-green matchup. Giving a target creature all creature types forever means that Sunderflock doesn't bounce your stuff, which is the Izzet Elemental's endgame. That's the spot they're moving towards where they just win when that happens. That's one of the things that makes that matchup so horrible. The backside of Oko is phenomenal. -1, mill 3 cards, put a permanent from among them into your hand. That's steady card advantage. You plus him up to 5 once, then you flip him. Then you can basically impulse, or I guess it's not impulse, it's strategic planning. You can strategic planning 5 times until he's dead. And also create 2 3/3 green elk creature tokens, which is really good against deck like Lessons that's trying to 1-for-1 their way through the game and then recoup with Ancestral Recall after they've bolted and shocked all your stuff. 2 elks is a big hit there, and then they still have the Oko body left over to have to deal with. And Lessons can shore that up with bigger sweepers like Slagstorm, but Pyroclasm doesn't get them. And the regional championship is open deck list. So I would know as I built my plan around Oko whether my opponent had Slagstorm or not, whether I could just send it on Elks or if I had to be a little more careful. And this card was phenomenal for me throughout the entire weekend. 3 copies of Spider Sense in the main. This is a negate / half of a stifle. This card's really good. I mean, dump out your shit, counter the Wrath of God, they die. Dump out your shit, counter the spell, the Sunder Flock trigger, they die. This just interacts with the things you really need it to in the format. And usually it comes down to, like I said, this deck presents wins on turn 3. But if you can stop a removal spell on turn 2, or if they do a removal spell early to slow you down to set up for something bigger on turn 5 or 6 and you stop that, then they just die. Stick Ouroboroid on a turn where you can Spider Sense to counter a Braid or Seer that would try to kill it. They're dead. Damage base removal is not going to work once this thing triggers. So this card is really nice to line things up with. And Meringue River Regent, which has come in and out of the list. Again, it's like Oko. It was in lists earlier, but fell out of favor. It's phenomenal in any green mirror. Being able to tutor this up to bounce 2 Badger Mold lands, or versus landfall, bouncing their Hydra before it doubles multiple times and kills you in one shot. Meringue River Regent's phenomenal. The card I didn't like is Formidable Speaker. The first build I was testing had 3 of them. It ended up down to 1, and I really wish this was just Archdruid's Charm, which also tutors for a creature if you need it, but it can also be a land drop or a removal spell. And it's really hard to be a removal spell in a deck like this. And it's really nice if sometimes you just have one way to do anything that's contrary to what everything else in the deck does. And I do wish that change had been made. But otherwise, big fan of the list. And then there's a bunch of Bossing Say, Sirach, Wistfulness, Curiosity. There's ways to become Simic midrange post-board. A really common sideboard pattern is you cut the Gene Pollinators and Mockingbirds versus anyone who's going to have Pyroclasms or Day of Judgments or anything. And then you replace them with stickier threats that are harder to answer 1-for-1, or they demand 1-for-1 answers rather than something like Gene Pollinator that needs a second permanent to even do anything. And then it's easy to kill once you get set up. That's the list. Here is the metagame for the event. And remember, I chose Cub because I wanted to beat Landfall and I wanted to be strong into Lessons. And the top 2 played decks are Lessons and Landfall, representing 19% of the metagame together, 19.5%. And then Dimir Excruciator, you're also pretty fine into them because you have all the Spider Senses that can stop their combo and you're just faster than them. Dimir Midrange, this is the classic Kaito Enduring Curiosity deck. You're very good into them. Your creatures are just bigger than everything they do, and Kaito doesn't matter in the matchup because you have so many blockers and so many ways to apply pressure to it. This matchup's nice. So I felt really good against the top 5 most played deck. I mean, Simic Rhythm, it's a coin flip. It's hope you win the die roll and mulligan to the nuts pretty much is your job there. But the other 4 of the top 5 are matchups I feel good about, so I felt really good with my choice. And now for the matchups themselves. I have my tournament path with my opponent's full deck lists available through melee.gg, and I took some notes. Normally I post these round by round, but I wasn't sure if my feed and my followers on socials would care about a standard tournament. So I put them in my notepad instead of posting them out live, but we do have notepad notes. Round 1, I paired into this 5-color Reanimator control combo deck. Basically, what this is trying to do is Herald of Eternal Dawn is a Platinum Angel, and Perenation is a reanimation spell that returns the thing to the battlefield with hexproof and indestructible. But basically, my opponent wants to get control of the game with 4 Lightning Helix, 4 No More Lies, 3 main deck Fire Magic. There's so much removal, so much counterspells in here, and they're just trying to get to the spot where they do the thing, and then I can't possibly win. And remember, this is an open decklist tournament, so I saw everything on the screen in front of us right now as we sat down for the match too. And I was looking at this and I was like, man, 3 Fire Magic, this sucks. Lightning Helix, this sucks. But this was the first real paper human match I had played with this deck. And it was the first match I'd played at all actually understanding the deck. I played 2 or 3 leagues on MTGO before I bought Toothy's Guide and before I talked to Mason. And that's when I was just doing it wrong. And I realized how little I care about any of this, because those Fire Magics don't matter at all once Ouroboroid triggers once. You're out of reach. They're never going to catch up. Lightning Helix, very much the same. If the Ouroboroid triggers once and Helix can't kill it anymore, then Helix can only kind of mop up the 2/2s. And while Ouroboroid continues to trigger, their combo is very thin. There's 1 Herald and 1 Reanimate that gets it back. And I'm playing 3 copies of Negate, and I have the ability to Goldfish turn 3 and just kill them and not even worry about their combo. This actually felt really good once I was in there, after I got over the fear of all these main deck sweepers. And game 1, I just had a fast Ouroboroid with double Spider Sense to protect it. And then game 2, this one was pretty sweet. I boarded into the Simic midrange plan because this sideboard has 2 more Day of Judgments, 2 Maelstrom Pulse, Flash Freeze. There's a lot more sweepers and interaction in the sideboard. I knew the game would have to slow down a little bit. And I set up a cool spot where I had 4 mana in play. My opponent was representing Day of Judgment. I pass the turn, they Day of Judgment. I float my mana off my dorks in response, flash out Enduring Curiosity. So it's a follow-up threat immediately. It starts drawing cards immediately. And then that turn, I also top-decked Bossing Zay out of the sideboard, which is 2 and a green, Earthbend 2, activate as a sorcery. So on the empty board with my opponent tapped out, I flashed an Enduring Curiosity, untapped, played Bossing Zay, stood up one of my lands, and attacked for 6 and drew 2 cards, just immediately after a Wrath. And if my opponent had another Wrath, the land would come back tapped, Curiosity would come back as an enchantment, and then I could just continue to Bossing Zay lands forever and draw cards forever. But the game didn't last that long. It ended very quickly after that exchange. But that was the moment where I was like, I'm feeling this. And as this tournament went on, like round 4, round 5, I started really feeling like I wasn't working off Mason's advice and Toothy's primer anymore. And I was really fundamentally understanding the deck myself at that point. Round 2, the dreaded Is It Lessons, the #1 deck in the format, the most played deck in this tournament. But it is a matchup that I've been told I'm positive into as Simic Rhythm, even though I'd never played against it before. This match was on camera. You can go watch that if you want to. My opponent, game 1, just had the Lessons nuts. It was like, kill a thing, or it was like turn 1 Grand, turn 2 kill 2 things, turn 3 kill a thing, play Ancestral Recall, which hit another Ancestral Recall, and I was never really playing. Game 2 was really interesting. I mulliganed to 5, and I think the hand that I kept was Llanowar Elves, Spider Manifestation, Forest, Soul Guide Lantern. And I played a Llanowar Elf, it died immediately. I top decked a land, played Spider Manifestation, that died immediately. And then on turn 3, my opponent was showing mana open, and the Lessons deck, again, thanks Open Decklist, has 2 Idle Quenches, and then also can board in Spell Snare, Flash Freeze, Spell Pierce, if they want as many counterspells as possible. Also 3 Steps Ahead is in the list. And my opponent suspiciously holding up mana. I played the Llanowar Elf in my hand first because I valued the Soul Guide Lantern more, and my opponent snapped off a counterspell on it, and then I could use my other mana to play the Soul Guide Lantern, which my opponent turned out last card in hand was accumulate wisdom, which I bombed the graveyard in response. My opponent got 1 card instead of 3, and then I was able to pull ahead. I don't remember if it was Oko or Quantum Riddler, but I was able to quickly rebuild from there, and my opponent wasn't. And I did rewatch this, and the commentary was Paul Cheon and Manny Davuti. And after turns 1, 2, and 3, where I mulled to 5 and all my creatures died, on coverage they were just kind of like, yeah, Lessons feels unbeatable when it's like this. Yeah, they just kill all your stuff, and then you can't really do anything. And then as I found the Quantum Riddler, and then the Oko, and then whatever to pull back in, they were like, hold on here. Wow, that was crazy. So that was actually a really good game. And then game 3, I had an early Oko, and it flipped. And I knew my opponent didn't have Slag Storms in his list because the list was open. I just made 2 Elks right away. And even though my opponent did have a lot of interaction, did get off an Ancestral Recall at one point, it didn't matter because if you have to use all those cards to catch up with a Planeswalker activation where the Planeswalker is still in play, you can still just outmuscle that. And that's what I did. But I was proud of that decision. It's not rocket science, but leading on Llanowar Elves and holding back the Soul Guide Lantern, like if I play Soul Guide Lantern first there, I think I lose that game and that match. But playing on Llanowar Elves first, giving my opponent the opportunity to just continue with killing anything that shows up kind of single mind without really considering that now it's turn 3, turn 4, maybe this Llanowar Elves is less important than it was on turn 1. That was really important. Round 3, I played against Is It Lessons again. This one was on a backup match. I don't know if those were aired anywhere. I don't know if they were used for additional like flashback content later in the broadcast or what, but there was one camera on the main feature match. There's cameras all around you to get like your face and your hand and the battlefield and everything. The backup feature just had one camera from the top. So I don't know if this actually exists anywhere online, but I was surprised to get 2 feature matches in a row featuring the same matchup twice in a row. I was wondering what was going on with that, but whatever, we take them. This opponent does have Slag Storms in the sideboard, which I clocked when looking at the list. And this one was pretty sweet because my opponent had turn 1 Storm Chaser's Talent, turn 2 Bounce Talent, Replay Talent, turn 3 Bounce Talent, Replay Talent, and then passed the turn into me with 3 Otters with prowess, and had been obviously hitting me with the Otters subsequently. And I think I was at like 11-ish when I got to my turn. I had a big turn, but it wasn't a full combo turn, but it was like pass the turn with 2 Ouroboroids in play. My creatures are really big, but there are only 3 of them or something. I was down to 3 blockers because I had to tap all my dorks, or maybe it was 2 blockers even. And my opponent was like, said something like, of course. And I was like, you got all that prowess. I think you might still be okay here. And he was like, I'd have to be pretty lucky. And then he managed to string together a turn of like 1 mana Storm Chaser's Talent from Reduced by Grand, which cast Ancestral Recall, which hit a burn spell and 2 bounce spells, which gave him exactly enough prowess and enough removal, even of my large creatures, to push exact damage through. And I was like, yeah, you have little faith. I was not that comfortable there. But it was like, it used every card in the hand, plus the Grand cost reduction, plus hitting the land off the Ancestral Recall. It all had to work out that way, but it did. And that was actually a pretty sweet game. Game 2, my opponent mulled to 5 and didn't really do anything. I don't know if the hand was all reactive spells, but I'm on my mid-range juke by now. Like the Gene Pollinators, the Mockingbirds are out. I'm not dumping these out into Pyroclasms and Slag Storms. I have the Wistfulness, the Curiosity, Sirach, this sort of stuff going on instead. Though it's possible my opponent just had a handful of Shocks and Slag Storms and never had an opportunity to deploy them. Or counter spells that he was saving for my big stuff, but I didn't actually have any big stuff. I actually boarded out the Crater Hoof, which hurt me a little bit here because I had the turn 3 Goldfish, but there was no hoof to spin into. But I still won because you could still just go bigger than their removal in that spot, and it's fine. And then game 3, I got to execute one of my favorite play patterns, which is you play Oko, you plus it twice, so now it has 7 loyalty. Then you flip it and you do the -6, choose a creature type, you get an emblem with creatures you control of the chosen type get +3/+3 vigilance and hexproof. And then you name elf usually, but worm is also viable. That's Ouroboroid versus Formidable Speaker and Llanowar Elves. And my opponent just couldn't do anything because a lot of the removal doesn't hit Oko. And if Oko just pluses twice, flips, and then emblems immediately, and then you play out a 4/4 Llanowar Elf with hexproof and vigilance, or a 4/7 Ouroboroid with hexproof, their whole handful of removal just doesn't matter anymore. And that's the game. My opponent scooped to the emblem. The Oko running amok. Round 4, I played against Mono Green Landfall, and getting the pairing was such a delight because I registered my deck specifically to get free money versus this deck. And I sit down, I look at the deck list. My opponent only has 2 Mossborn Hydras. Mossborn Hydra is a 3-mana 1/0/0 with a +1 counter on it and trample, and the counters double every time you play a land. This is the only card in my opponent's deck that matters. And it's the only card that I even have to think about. It's the only card that could possibly erase me. It also has to happen on turn 2 or 3. It has to happen on turn 2 if I have the nuts. It has to happen on turn 3 if I don't have the nuts. And then you have to hit like 4 to 6 land drops on your next turn to double until it's like 128 trample damage or something. And so if I win the die roll, this card doesn't matter. If I lose the die roll, my opponent has to have this 2 of in their hand for this game to be under any pressure at all. And I lose the die roll. Opponent has Llanowar Elf into Mossborn Hydra, and I get smushed game 1. Game 2, I'm on the play. My hand is fine. I just run him over. And game 3, I made a huge mistake. My opponent was playing kind of fast, like in a way that I had to ask him to slow down and resolve his triggers correctly, because he was kind of doing some out of order sequencing stuff where he'd like play 2 lands, fetch twice, get 2 lands, and then say like, and 6 triggers happen. And I'm like, no, but yes, fine, go ahead, but please slow down. And there was a turn where my opponent had a Saz Chocobo that was 3/4 and attacked into my Ouroboroid that was 2/4. And I was like, I thought he was just trying to chip shot, like bluff me. And I was like, there's no pump spells in the deck. Or there was one, was there the one Archdruid's Charm? Yeah, Archdruid's Charm. Yeah, Charm gives +1/+1 and fight. And he could have just fought before combat. And I was like, what am I even playing around here? And I just blocked with my 2/4. And then he just fetched his Fabled Passage that was in play and his 4/5/8 my 2/4 for basically free. And it turned out it mattered a lot because Formidable Speaker's untap ability with Badgermole Cub actually goes mana positive if you're untapping a dork. And then I ended up in a spot where I just had 2 Ouroboroids in my hand for the next 3 or 4 turns because I could never deploy them because I would take too much damage on the backswing, or I was 1 mana short or whatever. And just that one block that, you know, saved me 4 damage but cost me Ouroboroid. Instead of playing 4 turns where I have 2 Ouroboroids in play, I played 4 turns where I had nothing in play. And those 4 turns were enough time for them to figure it out. So I threw this one and I was pretty bummed with myself. You get the pairing you want, and then you throw away your advantage to an onboard trick. Embarrassing shit, really. But there it is. I lost to my best matchup. First loss of the tournament. Round 5 is Mono Black Midrange. This is really cool. This is the Unstoppable Slasher Bloodletter of Aclazot's combo. And the way that works is Slasher, when it hits someone, they lose life equal to half their life total. And Bloodletter is when your opponent loses life on your turn, they lose twice that much life. So that's Splinter Twin. It's a 3-drop into a 4-drop. And at that point, Slasher is lethal if it hits. And then the rest of this deck is all Duresses, Intimidation Tactics, Deep Cavern Bats, Check Your Hand, Clear the Way. And then they even have Unholy Annex Ritual Chamber to get some card advantage of their own. But I was actually worried about this. The discard, the removal, and the combo together is a lot. And my opponent won the die roll, had Slasher on it was Intimidation Tactics on 1, Bat on 2, Slasher on 3, Bloodletter on 4. So the game became about blocking Unstoppable Slasher. I'll bring this card up. Yeah, this is a 2/3 Death Touch. If it hits you, you lose half your life, which is actually all your life because the demon's also there. And when this dies, if it had no counters on it, return it to the battlefield tapped under turn under control with 2 stun counters on it. So it's also really hard to kill. So starting on turn 4, my opponent's turn 4 on the play, so that's my turn 3 on the draw. I have to block Slasher every turn of the game because my deck doesn't have removal in it, and all I can do is tread water. But luckily, I do have a lot of shitty little blockers. The Cubs, the lands the Cub activates, 12 mana dorks. My favorite play of game 1 was Mockingbird copying the Unstoppable Slasher, because then I can block the Slasher, they death touch each other. Theirs comes back with 2 stun counters. Mine comes back as just Mockingbird, because no mana was spent to play it, with 2 counters. So it's basically Mockingbird blocks the Slasher 4 times instead of once, like everything else in the deck does. And I was able to tread water exactly long enough. And I had a Quantum Riddler early on where it actually stuck in play. So his Bloodletter of Aclazotz couldn't attack into the Quantum Riddler. Riddler also couldn't attack into the Bloodletter. But they were just looking at each other. But every turn of the game was me dump out my hand of chump blockers and then draw 2 cards with Riddler, and then dump out my hand of chump blockers and draw 2 cards with Riddler. And the game went on so long like this that by the time I drew Nature's Rhythm, I just tapped 10 lands to play it. There was no dorks, there was no cheating on mana. It was just, we've got 10 lands in play, here's the hoof. And it was a really cool game. If my opponent had found any source of card advantage earlier, I'm probably dead. If they had found one more removal spell for the Quantum Riddler, I'm probably dead. But it was tight. It was a really good game. And then game 2, it seemed like my opponent kept on the strength of a Torpor Orb, which is a card that turns off Craterhoof Behemoth, Badgermole Cub, Formidable Speaker, and Quantum Riddler. Like these, it's not a 0, but it doesn't stop me ramping. It doesn't stop me tutoring. It doesn't stop Ouroboroid. I'm not even sure if it's right for a deck like my opponent's with so much removal and interaction to be worried about Torpor Orbing, because my opponent's deck also has Deep Cavern Bats and stuff in it, and Raven Eagle, that has an ETB ability as well. My opponent's turning off almost as many as their cards as they are mine, and I'm not sure if that card should even be in, much less kept on the strength of, but my opponent had a turn 2 Torpor Orb that did very little. At one point, I even evoked a Wistfulness into it that just got to stay in play as a 2-mana 6/5. And game 2 was a lot easier than game 1. Round 6, I get the Miracle pairing back into Mono Green Landfall. Sweet, a break. We can stop. We can, after that crazy last round, I get one of the easy ones again. And I had a fun exchange with my opponent where I handed him my deck list and he goes, "What fresh hell is this?" And I said, "You're not going to like it." And he goes, and opens it up and goes, "Well, I don't like the matchup, but I do like the deck. And if you're having fun, I like that for you." And he was just so positive, and I was like, you know what? You're right. That's the vibe that I hope to exude when I pair into my Nightmare matchup as well. And then our game 1, I lost the die roll. My opponent also has 2 Hydras. Those are the 2 cards that really matter in the matchup. And I lost the die roll. I had a bunch of mana and a Quantum Riddler to reload, but the reload didn't hit anything. And then I just kind of slowly ran out of creatures as my opponent built a larger and larger board, forcing me to chump block, and I ran out of gas. Game 2, I had a double Ouroboroid. Get it out quick, and they were just so big that even though my opponent was doing some Harmonizer stuff and some powerful stuff, I was just bigger, and it didn't matter. And then game 3, my opponent had Hardcast Mightform Harmonizer. That's the one that doubles the power every time a land comes into play. And I hit it with Unable to Scream, but my opponent had the 1-of Archdruid's Charm to remove the Unable to Scream, so the Harmonizer was right back in action, and it put me into chump block mode for a while. And I was able to eventually stabilize, get the board empty, but my opponent had Bossing Zay, which was enough that every turn just add 2 power to the board, while we were both otherwise not doing much. And once again, I lost my best matchup and the reason I played my deck. I'm 4-2, both losses to the deck that I specifically targeted with my deck choice. Feeling good. And then I get paired into Bant Airbending, which is one of my Nightmare matchups. They can also be a Cub deck. but this one is the more combo-centric one. This one, the way this one works is Doc Orlock, Grizzled Genius, and Appa, Steadfast Guardian, and Aang, Swift Savior. So Orlock, spells you cast from exile cost 2 less to play. Appa airbends any other target non-land permanent you control when it enters. And Aang, when it enters, airbend up to 1 other creature or spell. And airbend means you can cast it from exile for 2, which with Orlock means for 0. So Appa exiling Aang means that Aang can exile Appa, and then you could just bend these two back and forth forever. And Appa also reads, whenever you cast a spell from exile, create a 1/1 white ally creature token. So this is infinite 1/1s, infinite flickers, and that assumes you only have Appa and Aang. If you have anything else, like for example, Airbender Ascension, when this enchantment enters, airbend up to 1 target creature, and this one is not limited to yours like Appa is. If you're bending this in and out every time you loop, you're also airbending all of my creatures, so they're not available to tap for mana or do anything next turn. This deck has an infinite loop. It has great interaction. It also has Avatar's Wrath, a card that's a complete nightmare. Choose up to 1 target creature, airbend all the others, and until your next turn, your opponents can't cast spells from anywhere other than their hands. So this is a Plague Wind that's also Orum's Chant against everything I'm trying to do. Terrible matchup, and one that I was hoping would be unpopular when I chose my deck for the weekend. And as we could see, it was 2.8% of the metagame overall. So, I mean, I was right, but that doesn't help when you queue into it. But I was able to show the power of the Simic Cub deck, where game 1, I just had a fast Ouroboroid, and then I was able to Spider Sense an Aang trigger. My opponent, I could tell from a mile away that they had Aang, and my Oro was growing my squad. And I could tell on the last turn when I was going to attack for lethal that their plan was line up blocks and then Aang airbend out the Ouroboroid itself and then survive just enough to untap and combo. But they need the Aang to combo. So if they throw Aang down, airbend something, chump block with Aang, then they're not set up to combo. So they are incentivized to just bend. But by just bending and doing it after blocks where Aang couldn't jump in even as an emergency, I was able to Spider Sense the Aang airbend trigger and push lethal damage through. And then game 2, they bring in a bunch of spell snares and get lost, extra interaction for the matchup that's already great for them. And the main card I'm worried about is Avatar's Wrath, and I play out my first 3 turns normally. And then on turn 4, I just I held back turn 3 a little bit, just in case I got wrathed. And it didn't happen, even though it would have been really good. So then in my head, I decide my opponent does not have Avatar's Wrath. I'm going to play like they don't have Avatar's Wrath, because I can't beat it anyway. And then on turn 4, I just dumped out everything, including a big Ouroboroid. And I think I had another clutch Spider Sense at some point to stick my aggression. And I just pretty cleanly ran over 2-0 one of my worst matchups, which felt nice after losing twice to my best matchup. It just felt like the universe was balancing out a little bit, for whatever that means.
This video is sponsored by Moxfield.com, the easiest way to build Magic decks online. Moxfield supports over 30 formats, including Legacy and everything else you'll see on this channel. There's multiple customizations so you can interact with your deck how you want. Views such as text, grid, or stacks, and groupings like type, subtype, color, color identity, even artist. The site offers light mode, dark mode, and so much more. However you want to see your deck, Moxfield can provide it for you. Follow my Moxfield to keep up with the channel and what I'm playing in paper. I'll see you there.
Well, I'm flying high going into round 8, having just ended off an X3 record. You need to be X3 or better to make day 2. But your record carries over into day 2, so you really want to be 9-0, obviously, but that ship has sailed. I really want to be X2 going into day 2 to give myself a loss to give, if it comes to that, as the tournament runs down. And dodging the X3 versus the terrible matchup, feeling great. And then I queue into, once again, Landfall, which my opponent has played against twice in the tournament. We talk about And we're both X2, and he's like, yeah, both of my losses are the same deck. And I said, yeah, me too. And I didn't specify that it was to this deck, but this one's actually worse because this is the Gruul Splash that has full bore. Full bore is target creature you control gets +3/+2 until end of turn. If that creature was cast for its warp cost, it also gains trample and haste. That means Might Form Harmonizer at any point. This is the one that doubles power. Well, not really at any point. So at turn 5 and beyond, they can spend 3 mana to warp Harmonizer, 1 mana to full bore it, making it a 7 power haste trample creature, and then play a fetch land, double it to 14, play a fetch land, double it to 28. So starting at 5 land drops available, I need to be worried about this from any 3 cards in hand. Like the Harmonizer, the Bore, and the land to play. This is a completely different math problem or concern problem than the mono green build is. But because they have this combo, it does mean they're slightly later on Mossborn Hydras. There's only 1 in this deck. But, I mean, I think it's probably worth it here. And what's really messed up is this sideboard, 3 Pyroclasm, 2 Abrade, 2 Seer. They also just bring in 7 removal spells, including 3 sweepers for my deck. So this is much worse than mono green, but still, my opponent was like, I have not taken a game off of Cub yet in this tournament. And I was like, well, let's hope it goes my way. Game 1, I was able to stick an early Ouroboroid, grow my squad big enough, and it was big enough that the only thing I had to worry about was the combo, but my opponent was not able to put the combo together, and I won game 1. Game 2, I sequenced around Pyroclasm. Like, I had turn 1 Dork, and I could have played 2 Dorks on turn 2, but I only played out 1, so I would only lose 2 things to a Pyroclasm instead of 3. But my opponent had Seer instead, which was a 1-for-1 removal, where it's better if I dump out, because then I still have 2 Dorks going into turn 3, and that's the shell game of splitting your interaction like that. There's 4 spot removal spells and 3 sweepers, and I have to think about both. And so I lost the tempo by not playing out into the Pyroclasm and got Seared instead. And then I had a turn where I was able to build back to a spot where I could push next turn, but my opponent had the Pyroclasm then. So I played into Seer when they had Seer, and then I played into Pyroclasm when they had Pyroclasm, and that's just completely random. You just have to kind of pick what side you want to be on. And then game 3, my opponent had a really fast setup. I had to get Meringue River Regent to bounce 2 big things to stabilize, and then Meringue is just a 6-power flyer, so I was taking chunks, and it was like, opponent started at 18 from our sequence, and it was like, I think they probably had a Shockland to put them to 18, a Stomping Ground, and it was like, attack you to 12, use Spider Sense to survive getting comboed, attack you to 6, use Spider Sense to avoid getting comboed, and then it was pass the turn, hope you don't have a land. They had the Harmonizer, they had the trample from Earthbender Ascension. I couldn't keep it all down, but they did need to hit a land drop to start the chain. And this deck has 26 lands in it, plus 4 Ice Till Explorers, plus 4 Earthbender Ascensions. So I'm basically trying to fade more than half of the deck. And opponent draws for turn, just thinks for a minute, and then shows me a hand that's just a Pyroclasm and a Seer, and they're like, yeah, you got it. And I got very lucky to get away with, once again, the matchup that I built my deck to beat. But this time I did beat it, even if it was by the skin of my ass. And then round 9, we're locked for day 2, but again, I want good position on day 2. I'm not celebrating making day 2. That's not what we do. That's not why we show up. We show up to win the tournament. We show up to qualify for the Pro Tour. We don't show up to make day 2. I get paired into Is It Prowess, which is kind of a breakout deck from this tournament, and it's well known that it's in the format. Is It Prowess has just been part of Standard for years now, but it kind of fell off and then came back for this tournament. And I played against this a couple times online, and I don't think I ever beat it. I perceived it to be a difficult matchup because Slickshot Show Off does so much damage. Elusive Otter does so much damage. Both of them are very hard for me to block. I don't play any removal. It basically felt like I had to get lucky to win, because they also have 4 Boomerang Basics, 4 Burst Lightning, bounce off into the Flood Maw. That's 10 1-mana ways to interact with my setup while pushing damage on me. And I think my opponent may have thought the matchup was bad for them, or didn't understand what I needed to do to punish them, like what my critical mass was, because they just went land go on turn 1, and I went Llanowar Elf go, and they just like bounced it off or into the Flood modded in my end step. And what I'm worried about out of this deck is the turns where they have 2 or 3 prowess creatures in play and go like bounce, bounce, burn, and just clear all my blockers, and then give their squad like +10/+10 from casting 3 spells, and then I just die. So exchanging the tempo of bouncing Llanowar Elf to my hand on an exchange that dealt 0 damage to me, I'm very happy with. And my opponent's hand was just really reactive, and I think I was able to follow up the bounce spell turn with double Llanowar Elf, so now I've caught all the way back up, and then I stuck an Ouroboroid and just won game 1. Game 2, I brought in the Unable to Screams. This card is a lot of fun to play with, by the way. I like this one a lot. It's a 4 in the sideboard. It's my only real removal spell, and it turns the creature into a 0/2 with no abilities. And my opponent had a turn 1 Elusive Otter. I made it Unable to Scream. They used Boomerang Basics to bounce their own Otter, replay it. I had another Unable to Scream. And these 2 turns of tempo, it was locking down the creature twice, and then they had to use Boomerang Basics just to get a creature rather than to push damage or draw cards and move ahead with something like Storm Chaser's Talent. Bought me enough tempo to get over the finish line. By then, my creatures were big enough that I could handle it. Then I go have a responsible dinner, go to bed early so I'm recharged for day 2, show back up in the morning, and immediately pair back into Is It Prowess. In this one, game 1, I was able to present the fast combo. My opponent bounced a Spider Manifestation to delay it by a turn, but they weren't applying enough pressure to kill me on that turn. So instead of like what they really want to do, like I mentioned in the last round, is they want to bounce one of my creatures in a way that also deals 3 to 6 extra damage to me. But they weren't pushing that hard. I was able to just redeploy on turn 3 and then actually win on turn 4. So had the Goldfish, mildly disrupted, but it was still fine. And then game 2, I had Unable to Scream on an early creature, but opponent had a lot of creatures in their hand. And then I was able to get Oko to a place where he flipped. He made 2 Elks. Opponent had an Elusive Otter left over that we were basically just in a full damage race. Nobody was really trying to stop the other. We were just trying to hit each other. And Elusive Otter is the one that can get through the Elks if it gets big enough. And when I flipped Oko, like it was a play Oko plus him once, 5 loyalty, flip him, -3, 2 loyalty left on this one. I might have even, oh, it must have been a +1. No, I do remember this now. It was +1 to save 2 life off of a Slick Shot show off. Hold on, it's all coming back. It was -2 on Elusive Otter, which was important because that made it blockable for the turn, even through prowess triggers. Then I flipped Oko at 4 loyalty, made 2 Elks, which functioned as blockers well enough, but opponent basically dumped out their whole hand, getting Elusive Otter big enough to attack through the Elks, which put me to, I think, 4, which is conveniently not a very good number, because if the Otter gets to 4 anyway, the Elks can't block it. So that's the number. My life total happened to be the target number to get Otter to, just as a matter of happenstance. And on the last turn where I had my opponent dead next turn, opponent had me dead if Otter could get to 4. I used Oko's -1 to mill 3 cards and get a permanent back from among them. And I hit an Unable to Scream, and it was able to make the Otter blockable. And then my opponent just had no outs and I won the race. But Oko, MVP there. It activated 3 times, and all 3 times were super valuable. In round 11, I paired into Is It Looting, which is kind of a weird one, because this is a deck that had a lot of hate when Avatar first came out. I think the card Tiger Seal is a big part of that. 3/3 Vig. At the beginning of your upkeep, tap this. Whenever you draw your second card each turn, untap this. In 1 mana 3/3, that's a card people think about and try to make work. And we know that Is It Prowess Shell is good enough. We've got Op, we've got Boomerang Basics. It's not hard to draw a second card in a turn. This is a deck I had never actually seen or played against. In fact, on Toothy's Guide, I'm not going to pull up the exact passage because I don't know where it is, but on Toothy's guide somewhere it says, don't worry about Is It looting, that deck is dead. And I mean, certainly after playing against Is It Prowess 2 rounds in a row, queuing into looting and looking at the threats they present, it really is kind of the same deck with the same engines, but all of their threats cost 2 and have some sort of condition they need to meet, rather than costing 1 and just being big and unblockable. And I did feel good on paper looking at this after kind of finding my groove in the last 2 rounds against Is It Prowess. Game 1, though, opponent had double Duelist of the Mind into Winternight Stories, and that deals a lot of damage. Duelist has power equal to the number of cards you've drawn this turn, and it was like turn 2 Duelist, turn 3 Duelist, plus Torch the Tower one of your creatures, which also loots with the Duelist. Then turn 4 Winternight Stories, plus another removal spell, like a bounce spell, which also loots with both Duelists, and just in for 8, just like that. Or it was 10, right? Because you draw for turn, and then you draw 3 for stories, then you draw 2 more. Yeah, I got crushed by double Duelist in the Mind. And that is a recognizable pattern because Is It Prowess, they have Slickshot Show Off, which is the card I'm most scared about from their deck. And the Is It looting player had 2 copies of Duelist, and instead of any number of copies of anything else, and I got run over by those. Game 2, I had some Unable to Screams to slow down my opponent's early aggression, and I was able to just combo them out. And then game 3, we got to a spot where we were just in a damage race, and my opponent had 2 mana up, 3 or 4 cards in hand, clearly had at least one thing to do, and I had 1 Spider Sense in my hand. And I went for my lethal attack. I had an Ouroboroid involved, and it was like, move into combat. And in response to, like, before we left combat, opponent tried to bounce Ouroboroid, which would have taken both the Oro's body itself out of play, plus the buff it was about to give to my team, and make me lose the race. And I used my Spider Sense. My opponent still had a blue-red dual land up and some cards in hand. I'm like, if you have a second bounce spell here, or some kind of counter spell, I'm cooked. But they just didn't, and got through it just barely. Me and opponent had a chat after that play where they were trying to figure out, was there something I could have bounced instead? Like if I had bounced Mana Dork, then like that's not an attacker and you have less mana to execute your play. And we determined that it didn't matter. Opponent needed 2 pieces of interaction there because my Spider Sense would have done enough wherever it was pointed against a single removal spell. I actually did just have it covered, but it was a tight one. Round 12, it's starting to get real. I'm X2 with 3 rounds left in the tournament, 4 rounds left in the tournament. Like I try not to get too fixated on like just 1 more round and I qualify for the Pro Tour, just 2 more rounds and I top 8. I try not to do that because you just have to win the match in front of you. You have to win the next match. That's just how I think about it. And also, like I said, back in round 8, like we don't celebrate making day 2. We celebrate top 8s. We celebrate PT qualifications. We celebrate at the end. But round 12, though, it's starting to be like, wow, this tournament is actually almost over and my record is still very good. And I pair into the mirror match, Simic Rhythm, which is just a card drawing contest. It's a literal coin flip, like who gets to go first matters a lot. And then it's who has the nuts in their opening hand or who can find one before they go to 5. And I won the die roll. I nut drew my opponent game 1. Then it was my opponent's turn to go first. And I kept a slow interactive 6-card hand that had double Unable to Scream and then Quantum Riddler to reload. And my reload did not actually get me anywhere. And my opponent had kind of a slow hand as well, which lined up well. I was hoping they'd just go all in with some Cub stuff, and then I'd be able to Unable to Scream their pieces and collapse, and they wouldn't be able to transition into the mid game. But my opponent's hand was just rock solid, like Ouroboroid on 3, do some other stuff. And it ran me over, especially when my Riddler didn't finish what it started. And then game 3, I'm back on the play where I want to be. I mull to 5, and I play out some mana. I have a lot of mana. I have like double Cub plus Unable to Scream and Quantum Riddler. And I have like Cub. I only have one blue source though, so I can never play the Riddler. I warp it at some point. I draw two things that are not a second blue source and don't advance the game anymore. It's just like another mana dork. And then I'm basically stuck in waiting room hell, where it's like the second blue source gets this giant creature into play that also draws two cards, and then probably draws two cards every turn of the game after that, because these matchups don't really have removal, and I'm going to dump out my hand every turn because I have near infinite green mana, and I'm unable to do that. My opponent gets Meringue River Regent and has a decision to make. I have two Spider Manifestations, two Badger Mole Cubs, and two lands, one forest and one Verge, that are awake from the Cubs. And opponent chooses to bounce my two lands because that would take me off double blue to get the Riddler going. So basically, we're in the spot where if I draw Nature's Rhythm, I win on the spot. Not a damn thing you can do about it. But Spider Manifestations tap for way more mana, though my opponent had done the math that he was dead anyway if he bounced the Manifestations, and I drew Nature's Rhythm. So he took me off double blue to keep Quantum Riddler from drawing more looks at Nature's Rhythm, which is pretty clever. But I did the Craig Jones look where I just flipped my card face up as I drew it, and it was Nature's Rhythm, and I just comboed into Hoof easily and won from there. It's one of those moments where I've talked about this a lot, and so have anyone else who's ever won a Magic tournament. There are moments where you can do everything that was in your control, and you can set up the spot to be as good as it can be given how far behind you are, and you just need to be blindingly lucky at least once. And just like that round 8 where I needed to fade a land out of the landfall deck that had like 35 live draws in their deck, and I did. That was a moment of blinding luck, and ripping exactly Nature's Rhythm in the spot where no other card wins and I'm dead next turn. Another moment of blinding luck. But that's why you put those cards in your deck. That's why you play a combo deck. Sometimes you draw the piece when you need it. And I was able to get away with this one that was slipping away quickly. I have good news, though. My opponent, Alan, who was really nice, finished 35th in the tournament, and there were enough pass downs from people who already had Pro Tour invites that he did end up with his invite. So congrats, Alan. And at this point in the tournament, I'm looking at, I need one more win to lock up a Pro Tour invite. And if I win the next round, I actually have real shot at top 8ing this tournament as well. So I'm not even just looking at the PT invite. I'm looking at winning this tournament. And I'm checking the standings between rounds because deck lists are public. And I see that among the 15 or 20 people with my record, 3 of them are on Is It Spelementals? And everyone else is on good matchups. And I'm just like, can we fade these Spelemental players for 2 more rounds? And the answer was no. I queued into Spelementals, and there it is. Everything I talked about earlier at the top of this video, all those hours ago, is true. Spell Snares, Sunderflock, just Murderer's Row of removal. The sideboard, it gets worse. And this one was on camera as well. Definitely commentary. I think Jim Davis and Corey Baumeister did commentary on this one. Oh, last round was on the fake feature match. Again, I don't know if that footage exists, but there was a camera pointed at this match when it was happening. But back to round 13. We are playing game 1, and I'm trying to get ahead. Opponent has some removal. Opponent develops a Hearth Elemental, which is a problem because that sets up the Sunderflock. Normally, ideally, as the Spelemental player, you want to do it all at once. Like, on one turn with enough resources, big Elemental plus Sunderflock, bounce your board, pass with 10 power in play. That's the play pattern they're going for. But opponent didn't have enough spells in the graveyard to do it all at once, so played Hearth Elemental and passed. And I was making a plan like, okay, now how do I survive a Sunderflock? And I used Formidable Speaker to tutor Meringue River Regent, who is big enough that if my opponent does have the Sunderflock, bounces my board, I can play off of just 6 lands. That's the phase of the game we were at. I had 5 lands in play. I could play Meringue and just be bigger than Sunderflock as a flyer and try to ride that back out as I rebuild. And this is on coverage, and it's not well explained because it's off camera, but I saw my opponent write down Meringue River Regent, like, take a note that that's in my hand when I tutored for it. But I also noticed that the notepad said 3 Spider Sense, 2 Oko at the bottom, like where he had just taken that note. And those are the 5 cards that matter against Sunderflock in my main deck. And it is an open list tournament, but you have to put the list away when the game starts. And if you write down the contents of the list before the game starts, that's the same as just having the list out and never putting it away, which is outside assistance. And I just kind of asked, like, what are those other things written there? And there was a judge at the table, and the judge was basically like, when did you write these down? And my opponent was like, when I had the deck list out. And it was like, okay, well, you can't do that. And was given a game loss, and game 1 ended. And, sucks for a judge intervention to ever determine the outcome of a match, but my opponent did break the rules unknowingly in that spot. And we're off to game 2. And then I basically just get destroyed over the next 2 sideboard games. It's not particularly close. And opponent got through, and Jason, congrats on your top 8. And I am glad that that rules snafu did not cost you this match or this tournament. So now I'm dead for top 8. And I've played, I think, 2 regional championships before that, and I've never run this deep in one. But everyone is saying that X3-1 is guaranteed to make the Pro Tour. So everyone's talking about round 14 as if it's the last round of the tournament, even though there is a 15th round coming. And I'm just hoping for a solid matchup. And I queue into, you guessed it, Mono Green Landfall, the deck that I'm supposed to beat, but has been my nemesis this whole tournament. And we roll the dice. I win the die roll. I raffle stomp my opponent, who does nothing to stop me. We go to the sideboards. Game 2, opponent has 2 Meltstrider's resolves to kill 2 early mana dorks, but then doesn't really develop beyond that. And I absorb the speed bump in stride. Then instead of winning on turn 3, I win on turn 4 or 5. And it was the easy tee-off free money matchup against Mono Green Landfall I envisioned when I selected my deck. And it was the perfect time for it to show up, because it was true. Everybody who was X3 going into round 15 was able to draw into a Pro Tour invite. I drew with Is It Lessons? Not that it matters because we didn't play. And there it is, my 11-3-1 finish with Simic Cub at Regional Championship Milwaukee. I'm really excited to be back on the Pro Tour. I had 3 Pro Tour invites strung together. At the end of 2019, I won a Grand Prix, which qualified me for the next Pro Tour and the next Pro Tour final, which is how things were structured back then. And then anyone who attended a Pro Tour final got invited to the next Pro Tour. So basically winning one tournament queued me for 3 consecutive Pro Tours. And back in 2019, early 2020, I was like, hell yeah, this is it. This is my time. 3 Pro Tours locked. I'm going to grind. I'm going to get on the train. This is my year. I did pretty well at Pro Tour Phoenix, the Pioneer Pro Tour, the first ever Pioneer event. And then you may or may not remember what happened in early 2020 after that, but the world shut down, Magic Pro structure changed. I played 2 Arena Pro Tours that replaced the 2 Pro Tours I was queued for. The requalifying structure changed. Everything kind of fell apart, and I haven't really been close to re-queuing since then because I've been busy making content and for YouTube instead of playing RCQs and learning Standard. But as has been my way in the past, rather than grinding RCQs and PTQs to get to the Pro Tour, I just do well at one big tournament once in a while and get an invite. And we're back 6 years later. Well, 5.5 years since the last one. I've already been in conversations with some folks about teaming together, and I was going to be in Vegas anyway as a content creator. Oh, the travel's already booked. Everything looking great, and I am excited to be back. This was a great tournament, a solid result. I really like this deck, just at the fundamental level. The metagame will move. It'll be better and worse on different weeks, but that's how healthy formats look. And I'm glad I settled here. Thank you, Toothy. Thank you, Mason, for the guide and the help. And thank you all for watching. I hope this was fun. Debriefing 15 straight rounds is tough. I'm going to go have a throat lozenge, drink some water, and chill out. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you next time. Check out the Patreon to support the channel. I'm out of here.